Thanks everybody for joining the Panzura and Cloudian Lunch and Learn. My name is Glenn Schock. I'm the Director of Alliances for Panzura. Grant?
Hello everyone, Grant Jacobson. I'm one of the Alliance Directors at Cloudian. Thanks for joining.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about modernizing your file and storage infrastructure. A few housekeeping items. If you have questions, we're going to be monitoring the chat. So type your question into the chat while I'm presenting. Grant will interrupt me and ask your question for you. While he's presenting, I will do the same thing. We also have a few other moderators. If I miss something, Jess can feel to jump in and ask the question. You also have a couple of PDFs and attachments that you can feel free to download. One of them is this presentation, as well as a solution brief on the joint Panzura and Cloud offering. And finally, there's always feedback at the end of the presentation. We're going to be asking you a couple random questions as you, yep, there we go, poll's open. So we have a poll open for you to ask some questions as we're presenting. So the agenda today is to talk about key challenges when it comes to your data. Storing it, securing it, making sure it's available when it's needed. And that's what we're going to talk about for the joint Panzura and Cloudian solution. A new way to take a look at NAS. We'll talk about the technology, how we do what we do. We'll answer your questions, and that'll be it. And hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to grab lunch as well. So, Grant, do you want this one?
Is there a way to get rid of the poll?
It's gone, like okay. Magic.
Thank you. All right, yeah, the idea here, for those who may not be familiar with one or both companies, is together we are simplifying and securing the file data and scaling that as needed across one or more locations. So together, it's a way to modernize and simplify how you think about your file data, taking into account the storage infrastructure. So that's it in a nutshell.
So who is Panzura? Panzura provides a hybrid cloud global file system. That's at the end of the day a NAS filer. We provide a CIFS and NFS front end to the Cloudian HyperStore. Grant?
And HyperStore is an object storage platform, runs on your premise, runs in the cloud, so really hybrid multi-cloud ready. Key feature is security. We'll get into that. It is exabyte scalable. You can start small at 100 terabytes or so and scale non-disruptively. And it's an excellent fit and ideal for file and other unstructured data. So the idea again today is showing you a joint solution together with Panzura and Cloudian is to basically update your file and storage infrastructure in a modern way to be efficient, globally available, as it says, highly performant, and it's basically the best thing you can do.
Really, we want to change the way you look at NAS from the ways of the past to what's available today. Okay, so what are today's challenges? Grant?
Yeah, so hopefully you may resonate or recognize some of these, but the amount of data in the world is continuing to double roughly every 18 months. IDC says it's going to be 175 zettabytes in the world, and at least half of that data is NAS data. And the issue and the challenge, therefore, is how do you scale it? Where do you put it? How do you manage it? Can you afford to keep it? And then there's performance that goes with that. in terms of access to the data. Security is increasingly important. There's ransomware attacks every 11 seconds these days in the news. Last week, it was all about healthcare organizations, hospital systems being attacked, but it's really any industry. And so protecting that data from attack or even internal rogue threats is important. For some data, there's compliance issues, especially for regulated data, healthcare, financial services. So wherever you're from, you may have a compliance requirement to keep that data. And of course, the way that's done, as Glenn was just saying, this is really a better way to do it, because the traditional systems are expensive, complex licensing. How do you manage it, especially across locations? And so what we're talking about here is updating to be automated and simplify how all that works. So there's more challenges than that, but that's probably some of the easy ones.
So you have data coming at you from all sides, yet you seem to be storing it the way you did about 20 years ago, right? Traditional NAS systems were sold as silos, and effectively you're going to run out of performance on the front end, meaning with the CPU and the memory capability of that box, or you're going to run out of performance on the back end. How many storage arrays you can attach to the backplane of the system, the infrastructure on the back end of that system. Effectively, once you run out of one or the other, you have to buy another one. And when you buy another one, you have the issue of paying software costs for that second system. You also have the issue of paying hardware maintenance costs for that second system. You also potentially have to replicate. So the reason why this really hasn't changed in the past 20 years, as you can tell, is it's really lucrative for the incumbent NAS vendors to keep selling you these silos. Because you have to buy more software, you have to buy more hardware when they run out of steam. Also, in the past, I'd say 5 years or so, cloud has become this thing that people were thinking about going to the thing that people are going to. And the answer from the traditional NAS vendors about working in the cloud space is just to put one of those systems in the cloud. Again, pay for the software, pay for the hardware, or pay a very high dollars per gig per month associated with doing that work. So this is great and lucrative for the existing and the incumbent vendors, but what we're here to talk about today is how Panzura and Cloudian are going to change that.
So I mentioned in terms of a challenge is all that data and all that file data. And those systems that Glenn is talking about are very, very expensive. And they really don't scale cost effectively in a way. So whether it's enterprise data, traditional data, backup data, but even some of the new types of data that organizations are keeping, like social media, and other sensor data, if you have that data at the edge, it's really really quite amazing. And so let me see if I can move this slide here. Try again. Okay, another challenge is, as Glenn mentioned, the rise of the cloud, the public cloud. And these days, the requirements are to have both on-prem data as well as data in the cloud, whether that's any of the famous public clouds or some of the other ones as well. Wherever that is across locations, how do you manage all of that? And most organizations, if they're not already here, they're moving there. And there needs to be a file storage solution that accommodates that need. So here is the solution. I'm going to turn it back to Glenn.
Thanks. So let's take a look at this picture, right? What do we have pictured here? We have a multi-site environment, which means traditionally, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 locations and potentially even some cloud native, you would need to buy file services in each of these locations. So you'd put a, not to pick on one in particular, but you'd put a net up here and a net up there and a net up there, and you'd use the file services in the cloud. And you're paying obviously independent costs associated with that for software, the hardware, the remote replication. You're not getting global dedupe in these locations, right? You're getting dedupe in one location, but if somebody copies that file over here or over here, you got yourself a problem. So what's different? With the joint Panzura and Cloudian solution, you can put Cloudian systems in a couple of your data center locations, and you would put a filer, the Panzura filer, which is a software application that runs as a VMDK or Hyper-V locally. It can also work as an AMI in the cloud, as well as in a VM in Google or Azure or wherever. And every place that you put that Panzura filer, we connect to the Cloudians on the back end, to the object store. So the problem that we solve here is that everybody has local access to the same global file system. You have global deduplication, you have global compression, right? And a single source of truth for the entire solution. When you do this, you open up new opportunities, right? Because when all the I/O is cached locally, it feels like you're doing local I/O, but via FIPS or NFS, the traditional NAS protocols, but you're doing non-destructive writes to a backend object store, you get the best of all the worlds, right? And if you're looking at taking applications into the cloud, right, you can have a filer sitting in a VM in GCP or in Amazon or in Azure. All of those locations, you can use their native services to access that data within the global file system, as they're doing here, but in reality, they're accessing the single copy that's sitting on the Cloudian within your data centers. And so you don't have to keep copying and quote unquote moving data to the cloud. You have simple access to it via NFS or CIFS for those cloud native applications. So we can do stuff like air-gapped HA, which is something that we can talk about for a more complicated type of solution. But realistically, our goal here is replacing these multi-site siloed NAS systems, the ones that are slowly aging out, with a technology that's capable of giving you the same performance, but also home running to a single source of truth with the backend Cloudian. And we're going to talk today about how we make that happen. So those benefits, meeting your SLAs, right? The great thing about this joint solution and the fact that the Panzura filer does not do destructive writes is that jointly we are not susceptible to ransomware. We've had Panzura customers that have had ransomware attacks against them, and they were able to recover within a matter of minutes. Some that chose to do forensics on the ransomware attack took upwards of a day, and that's because they wanted to figure out why it happened, how it happened. They wanted to keep some data crypto locked on purpose so that they can report it to various agencies. But all of the primary data set can be recovered virtually immediately because, again, we do not do destructive writes. We make this very simple to scale, right? The Cloudian can scale to petabytes on end, right? And it's very simple to grow the system. It's very simple to replicate. And the Panzura filer goes in front of that very simple operation. So we work very well together as well as very quickly together. We are both sides of us are FIPS 140-2 compliant. So we're going to talk a lot about the security and associated with the compliance. We each have slides on that for the hardware as well as the software. And the key is we're getting all of this high performance at a very low cost. Our joint dollars per terabyte, when compared apples to apples against an incumbent NAS vendor, we look fantastic. And that's because our joint solution, we don't have customers that do backups. We don't have customers that need to do remote replication for offsiting, right? So when you take a look at a standard siloed system, you have to, one, remote replicate it, two, you have to back it up. So those costs change dramatically when pairing a Panzura filer with a Cloudian. We do have a comment that NAS has changed. We're getting gigabit speeds now. We didn't before. That's true. But at the end of the day, we can still get the same level of performance. So, you know, the technology has advanced, but the way that you're buying that technology really hasn't. And that's what we're bringing to market with our joint solution. So let's talk about the Panzura piece of this. So what Panzura has brought to market is a NAS solution, traditional CIFS, NFS front end, to a back-end object store. And the Panzura filer, again, which is a software filer that can be deployed via a VMDK or Hyper-V, as well as deployed in the cloud via AMIs or VMs. Everywhere you put this piece of software, we home run to a back-end Cloudian, for example, and you are able to access the entire global file system locally or wherever that filer is, no matter where your storage is. So we have an immediate global data consistency, the way that we handle all of our metadata, which I'll be talking about soon. And we provide local performance by virtue of caching, right? So when you install that filer, let's say via VMDK on premises within a data center, we configure it for CPU, memory, as well as local storage using SSD or NVMe as a percentage of the entire back end. And with that, we do intelligent prefetching to allow for that local feel of a local NFS or CIFS interface to an object store that could be sitting very far away. It could be across the country. So where do we really play, right? Where does this joint solution work best? Like I said, if you have multiple siloed NAS systems at multiple sites, that is the #1 way to gain the benefit of a joint Panzura and Cloudian solution. You can replace all of these siloed systems for which you're paying hardware and software maintenance for with a single set of Cloudians, and you can put a Panzura filer in each of these locations. And by the way, when you buy the solution, it's based on capacity on the back end. So if you have 3 sites today, but you're growing to a 4th site tomorrow and to a 5th site next year, if you're looking at putting traditional NAS silos within those locations, it would obviously cost you hardware, software, remote replication, backup, all of those costs. With our joint solution, you just put a Panzura filer in that location, point it to the backend Cloudian, and you're done. That's it. It costs you nothing outside of the cost of the hardware for the VMware instance that you have to bring up. So there's no additional software maintenance. There's no additional hardware maintenance. If your company grows from 3 locations to 300, what you're going to notice is there's no cost associated with that growth. Now, yes, we do have auditing capability. We can have that conversation offline because we didn't put that set of information in here, but I did have a question about an audit log. We have a phenomenal UI that allows for auditing of every piece of I/O that happens to the system, and it's really neat. The product is called Vision AI or Panzura Data Services. Okay, if you're tired of managing multiple data sets, wouldn't it be nice to have a single backend source of truth? Right? Again, you have all those NAS islands, right, that are doing potentially I/O between each other, and you're no longer deduplicated once you copy data from one NAS system to another, right? So the deduplication doesn't happen. With the Panzura and Cloudian solution, with that single backend source of truth, everything in this order is done. You're deduped, you're compressed, and you're encrypted. right? So you get the value of true deduplication before encryption, because then you can't deduplicate the other way around. So what we're seeing is a reduction in storage costs by up to 70%. How are we getting that? We're getting that the way that I mentioned before. If you have traditional NAS, you have to offsite it via remote replication. So you're paying software cost for remote replication. You're paying double the hardware cost because you have to buy a second system to offsite it onto. And you're also paying the costs associated with doing backups, storing backups, recovering from backups, and all that sort of thing. Because our joint solution with the Panzura filer and with the Cloudian, we don't do destructive writes, you can recover to any point in time of that individual file or of that individual file system, because we do snapshots very often. And we reduce all of the headaches associated with backups, with remote replication, and all that sort of thing. Data consistency, how does it work? So if you put a Panzura filer in each of these locations, right, and you home run them to a Cloudian, let's say it's sitting in the East Coast of the US, the way that the Panzura filers work is it's a hub and spoke for data, right? So let's say you're on the West Coast of the US, you're doing IO to a local Panzura filer here. What we do is every 60 seconds, we work our darndest to fill up the block and then ship that block over to the backend Cloudian. So, but we also have a mesh network going on, right? So we're hub and spoke for data, but we're mesh for metadata. So if you started a write operation for a large video file, for example, somebody started dumping it here on the West Coast, the write operation's happening, it is moving to a Cloudian on the East Coast, and that IO is going. Within less than a minute, every one of these Panzura filers in all of these locations becomes aware that that file exists, which means if they open it up in Windows, they'll see it in the browser, they can double click on it and they can actually start reading that file before the copy operation is done. And this is a big difference between us and our competition, which takes a very long time to ship out that metadata. The more sites our competition tends to have, the longer it takes for that metadata consistency to actually catch up. And if you have over a certain amount of sites, they almost never catch up, right? Within us, the way the Panzura filer works is we get metadata consistency in under a minute. If you're working in the AEC space, that is architecture, engineering, construction, or if you're working in the media and entertainment space, you have applications that are latency prone. So moving to cloud can become a real problem for you. Moving data out of a single site can be a problem for you, which means that historically folks within that space have just copied files. They've used something like a Google Drive or a Dropbox or Box. They throw the file there, then everybody kind of opens it up, and then you have all these versioning issues, and it becomes a problem, especially for working from home, which everyone is doing these days. But if you have applications like Revit, Civil 3D, SolidWorks that can open a file simultaneously for read and for write, so the Panzura filer enables byte level locking, right? And because the IO is done locally, right? And you don't have that latency issue, but you can have folks all over the world editing the same file for read and for write without any versioning issues, without overwriting each other, because again, we're byte level locking there. And that is very unique to what Panzura has to offer. Same goes for the media and entertainment space. If you're working in those applications that support simultaneous writes. Collaboration on giant files. I talked to you a little bit about collaboration, but what I didn't mention is if you open a file for read and write in one location and then read and write in a separate location, what can sometimes happen with our competition is you make a small change in that file. Let's say it's a gigabyte file, and you make a couple of bytes of modifications. that entire file has to be sent back to their backend object store with our competition. With Panzura, all we're doing is shipping the deltas. That's the joy of also byte level locking, right? You make changes to those bytes are locked, the backend, it's shipped to our backend object store, and the update happens very quickly because we're not shipping gigabyte files around your network. We're only shipping the deltas around the network. That's huge for media entertainment. That's also huge for the AECM space. Right, and that's pretty much what I talked about here as well. Right, it feels like we're transferring large files very quickly because of the change in bytes. We're only shipping deltas, but we're also updating the metadata in under a minute in all of these locations. So we maintain a global consistency everywhere, and everyone can take advantage of that immediately. So they can see what files are being uploaded in real time. Cloud mirroring. So let's say that you want to do Panzura with a Cloudian solution, but you have an internal directive that says that we need to mirror that data to another vendor or to another cloud space. With Panzura, we can use the Cloudian as our primary storage, but we can also do write splits and write split that off to another backend object store, such as Google Cloud or something like that. That would be a secondary, right? So even though you have a lot of reliability within the backend Cloudian system, there's always companies out there that say, we're not going to put all of our eggs in one basket. We want to mirror somewhere else. So we have that functionality. We do have a question. Do we have a competitive guide, Panzura versus Nasuni? Yes, we do. We can actually, Jess may be able to upload that into the PDF bin here. If not, just email one of us directly, and we'll get that to you. Egress charges, we have, the egress charges only exist if you are in the cloud specifically, and there's many ways to circumvent egress charges depending on who your bandwidth providers are and stuff like that. If you need military grade encryption, Panzura has many 3-letter agencies that are customers. We are FIPS 140-2 certified. Everything at the edge is AES, so we're encrypted over the wire. We are encrypted at rest as well. I'm coming up on my time. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is crypto locking. So this looks like a marketing slide, but it's actually a very useful slide. If you think about what happens with crypto lock, all right, you have a file, ransomware hits you, they encrypt that file, and now you have to unencrypt that file, you have to pay them, or you lose. They've also gotten really intelligent to where they're asking for a ransom later and later, so that you can actually be backing up an encrypted file. And so it's much more difficult to recover from that backup because who knows how long it's been. With the joint Panzura and Cloudian solution, like I said, we do not do destructive writes. So you have the original objects on the back end, right? Every time a write happens to this file, we just add more data. So if you've been crypto locked, all you have to do, if you have like Microsoft VSS on one file in particular, you can right click on it and then go back to the point in time before you're crypto locked, and you have no problem. We have tools to do that analysis for you, to do that en masse, so that you're not relying on your user base to do this, or you can just recover from a snapshot. We don't generally recommend recovering for a snapshot on crypto locked data because you're recovering your entire file system from that snapshot, whereas we can figure out which files were crypto locked, which ones weren't, and just recover those. So those are your options. The neat thing is, we have had customers that have been ransomwared, and none of them made the news because they were able to recover in hours for the most part, or minutes in some cases. Okay, Grant, it's all yours. The mouse is at the forward button, and you're good to go.
Great. I think, Glenn, maybe this would be a good time to ask the second question.
Oh, yes, please. put the second question up on the poll.
We do
Jess.
that.
Okay, so you have the poll question out. Feel free to answer while Grant's chatting.
Yeah, very good. So thank you, Glenn. So Glenn did a great job showing you the Panzura file system. I'm going to spend a few minutes here talking about Cloudian HyperStore. Let me just see if I can move the slide. Here we go, Cloudian HyperStore. Really, this is an object storage platform, probably the industry's most compliant S3 object store. We do roughly 97% of all the S3 features after AWS. So for any other S3 application that you may have that needs storage, this is also a very good platform for that. It's simple, easy to set up and deploy. And as I said earlier, you can start small and scale non-disruptively. We're showing you on the left there a Cloudian appliance, but this actually is software. So this can run on your hardware, or it can run on these appliances. Available from as low as 96 terabytes to, for certain data, 1.5 petabytes in a 4U enclosure. On the right, we're showing you our HyperlQ, which is the analytic insight into that data. That's in addition to what you are getting with Panzura. I think we're both a single global namespace, so you have unified view and control of that data. Okay, as we said, very scalable, limitless capacity, essentially, again, in one or more location. As you add capacity, you're also adding performance. So all this is managed as basically one device. It is, with multiple locations, a meshed location for both the object data, or the file data in this case, as well as the metadata that goes along with that object. And we've got customers around the world proven in multi-petabyte deployments, both on the enterprise side as well as service provider side. So if your organization has, as a service, this works great. There's it's a rich set of service provider features such as multi-tenancy, such as QoS and billing as well by tenant. We've talked a little bit today about the cloud and the shift to the cloud. This is very flexible, so however you are implementing Panzura, this works. And starting on the left here, private cloud. This could be one or more locations, with or without the tenancy features. This can be tiered to the cloud, to a private cloud. Some customers, as Glenn said, want to tier up, and then sometimes they do that in multiple places. So if you want a really resilient data protection architecture, we are very flexible in how that needs to be deployed. And then I'll also mention, because security is such a big deal, we're actually doing that at a storage level here with this slide, showing you data protection for the buckets themselves, for the storage buckets. And we've got options for both replication within and across sites, as well as erasure coding within and across sites, or a mix and match. So some sites or some racks you may want to be replicated. Some others you may want to do erasure coding. Erasure coding is a little more cost effective, and depending on how many nodes and locations you have, you have the choice on how you do that. By the way, if one way we keep things cost effective is having this ability to mix and match, whereas other solutions you have to have a single protection scheme, and it can be very expensive. The other side of that security story is what Glenn was talking about, the FIPS 140, for example, but I'll also point to you at the common criteria, which is a US certification that actually goes beyond just the software level security level. It actually includes system level hardening certification. And so for these Cloudian nodes, even with the secure software, we're also providing a secure shell. We're also providing access controls, and so we're making multiple level security capabilities available. So taken all together, it's probably nothing better in the industry with the combination of the Panzura and Cloudian security capabilities. On the bottom of the slide is just a reference to MilCloud. If you're not familiar with MilCloud, that's the US Department of Defense Enterprise Cloud. Cloudian is the storage for MilCloud 2.0. One more slide here, just showing HyperlQ, really for analytics. We're getting increasing questions or requests and compliments even for this kind of capability. It's real-time monitoring of the data. Again, this is complementary to the Panzura capability. There's a lot of insight and analytics that can be done with this. I could spend another hour talking about it, but I'll just give you a quick view here with this slide. And then finally, just a few other things to highlight. I mentioned the S3 compatibility, very important, because most of the unstructured data is perfect for object storage. It's your file data here, but it might be some of the other applications you're running. And so this data, this storage, works not just with Panzura, but really across the application set. And that can include not just, let's say file, but I'll pick another one. Maybe you're running Splunk. Maybe you're running something else that's S3. There's also a Kubernetes capability these days. So if your DevOps team is interested in container applications or development, that works too with this same storage set. So you can actually get a lot of economies and extensibility out of the storage as your needs grow and evolve. I think I've covered most of the other things on this slide, so I'll just move on to the next slide, to the final solution summary. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Glenn.
Okay, we did have one question that said, is the joint solution the on-site solution with Panzura and effectively Cloudian, because you're talking hardware, just as expensive as a typical NAS server? And the answer is dollars per terabyte. Yeah, probably. Our joint solution is going to be about the same price. But let's take a look at that. Let's break it all down. If you are talking about buying a traditional NAS system in a single site, right? And let's say that NAS system is going to be a petabyte in size, just one number, right? If you want to do remote replication, right? If you want to get that offsited, you're paying for a second system, second set of software, second set of hardware. You're buying 2 petabytes worth of systems. You're also going to have to be backing that thing up, right? And the costs associated with doing backups, which means buying additional disk space and backup software and all that type of stuff. So while our dollars per terabyte look the same, the amount of terabytes you're buying is going to be less than half, because you're getting dedupe, you're getting compression, you're getting encryption, all of which is included, by the way, within that price. Other people tend to nickel and dime depending on what kind of software you want. Remote replication software is also expensive with our competition, and then you have to buy that second system. So with us, you're buying a petabyte, maybe even less, With the competition, you're buying more than 2 petabytes worth of hardware and software, which makes them more than twice as expensive. Plus, when you start talking about silos, now you're talking about managing all those silos. Once you talk about buying a second, third, fourth, fifth site worth of systems, and you're copying data between those sites, you're no longer getting the benefit of a global deduplication. Again, you're paying over and over and over for the same data. In our case, you're not. So while the dollars per terabyte will look pretty much the same, the cost and the TCO, the total cost of ownership of this joint solution, is going to be considerably different, right? Because you have less stuff to manage. You have easier deployment capability. You don't have to worry about doing backups. You're not susceptible to ransomware, right? You can add another site literally for free, right? Minus the cost of, little asterisks, the cost of actually the hardware it takes to run it on a VM, right? So you're talking about 12 cores, 32 gigs of memory, and a little bit of storage for local caching, right? So those are going to be fixed costs, but no additional software costs associated with adding one site, another site, and another site, where that is a completely different story from the competition. Also, the availability of our joint systems is ridiculous compared to traditional NAS systems, right? Panzura offers multiple forms of high availability in the form of a local HA node, which is just a second Panzura filer, or a global HA node, which allows for failover to another site for that filer, which enables solutions such as air-gapped business continuity and all the more complicated technical stuff that feel free to email me, and I'd love to talk to you about. So from a total cost of ownership perspective, the Panzura and Cloudian solution combined will be less than half of the cost of any traditional set of NAS systems deployed on site today. If you want to learn more, please go to Cloudian.com. You can get a free trial of Cloudian there with the Cloudian.com/free trial. If you have questions for me, you can email me gshock@panzura.com, or just go to our website. Now I'm opening it up. Well, look at that, 12:45 on the dot, as promised. I'm opening it up for questions. I've been getting questions from Anthony. We can unmute people if you want to unmute yourselves to ask questions. I've been answering them along the way. I did have a question. Do you support encryption at rest or deduplication and compression? So the order of operations for a Panzura filer in front of a Cloudian backend is that we would do dedupe first, then we compress anything that we can't deduplicate, and then we encrypt. It has to be in that order because you can't deduplicate encrypted data, obviously, right? And Cloudian as well supports encryption on the back end. You probably want to turn that off, either on their side or on ours, one or the other. It's fine because we're going to encrypt the data in flight either way. So if you want to use Cloudian's encryption at rest versus ours because you like, or you have other systems and you want to use their key management, that's cool. We also support key management. So it just depends on your architecture. But we do global deduplication, then compression, and then encryption. Anything else come up? Jess or Anthony, do you see anything else in the chat?
I do not.
Okay, hopefully everybody got their lunch coupon thingies. If you did not, you have my email address. Email me, we'll fix that. I do have more questions. Let's see, how is HyperStore different than other object stores? That would be a question for Grant.
Sure. Well, one of the key differences is security, which I covered. I think I would just point you to the multiple types of security capabilities that comes with HyperStore. As I mentioned, the Other differentiation includes the native service provider feature set, which can be really important if you have internal customers, you're not a service provider, but you want to use the multi-tenancy and the QoS and even billing out capability. So those were two things in addition to the S3 compatibility, which is increasingly important for a lot of customers who have those applications. Briefly on that, with the S3 really default standard set by AWS, that really caused a lot of either new applications to be written for S3 or others to be updated for an S3 capability. And now those are available to run outside of AWS, and that's exactly what we're doing here. Of course, Panzura very well supports S3, but that capability, including things like multi-part upload and others, are becoming very important. So those are three quick ones. If the person asking the question wants to know more or other areas technically and otherwise where there might be some advantage with HyperStore, we'd be glad to chat.
Yeah, we do have one more question for you. What storage level data protection features does Cloudian provide?
Sure, and that was covered in the slide. Perhaps you missed it. This is the erasure coding and replication ability at a node level or a rack level, location level, or even across locations. That's actually another area of differentiation between us and the others. And the ability to do that will actually save you a ton of money in actually having to deploy storage that you wouldn't necessarily need. So it's very streamlined. So that works extremely well. And the sort of technical term there is data durability. So if you want 11 nines like AWS, or even 14 or 18 nines of durability, you can do that easily with HyperStore by deploying with replication and or erasure coding.
Perfect. And asked about external KMSs for encryption. We do support external KMSs, not a problem there. And we had a question about 10 terabytes of data in 4 separate offices. Is Panzura a realistic option? Grant, what's the smallest Cloudian that you guys sell?
Yeah, I'd say starting would be about 100 terabytes usable. You'll need 3 nodes, which would be a 2+1 erasure coding deployment, and so easily supports the 10 terabytes. But I think to make cost effective, you're going to want to have some additional data.
Yeah. So for the joint solution, it may not be because of the hardware costs and the entry point. Panzura does support clouds. If you have an existing cloud vendor that you're using for that, maybe we can look at a joint solution there. You know, a low-cost cloud vendor probably would be your go-to there. But the entry point for a Panzura and Cloudian solution, realistically, we want to look at 100 terabytes and above. That was the last question. Oh, wait, snapshots, array level for ransomware protection. Okay, so yes, we have snapshot capability. You can schedule them. We also schedule them internally within the Panzura. And we're not susceptible to ransomware in any way, shape, or form. You do not need to recover from the snapshot, however, unless the entire file system was crypto locked. If you have just one user that got something on their PC and they crypto locked 20 files before you guys figured it out, we can recover those 20 files individually, so you don't have to lose the rest of the data within that file system. So we can make ransomware recovery very, very simple for you, and your recovery point objective is that point before you got crypto locked. So you're going to lose practically no data. Okay, that was our set of questions. We hope everybody enjoyed this and found it useful. It is a different way to look at NAS. It is a completely different way to view NAS from not only a technology perspective, but also from a cost perspective. It doesn't have to be as expensive as it is for you today. If you have 3-year-old or 4-year-old systems out there that are everywhere, you might want to take a look at a joint Panzura and Cloudian solution. I assure you we will be less expensive, not only in the upfront costs, but also in the day-to-day maintenance and in the backup and in the recovery and the whole 9 yards there. So if you have any questions, feel free to ping me or follow up for this webinar. Everyone will get an email from us as well. You can just respond to that email. Thank you, everybody.